Most entrepreneurs don't start by thinking, I have an internal pattern I need to work with. They usually start with something much simpler. I'm not disciplined enough. That's usually the first explanation. You sit down to work, you feel behind, you end the day knowing you didn't show up the way you wanted to, and the easiest conclusion is, I need more discipline. And to be clear, discipline is still a super essential skill. This isn't one of those videos where we pretend discipline is bad or structure is bad or routines are bad, or that you should just wait until you feel inspired to do the work. That's not the point. The point is that discipline isn't always the first layer. Sometimes discipline is trying to force behavior before the internal pattern has changed. And when that happens, discipline turns into brute force. You can force yourself into action for a while. You can push through, just grit your teeth, use a Pomodoro timer, block out your calendar, delete distracting apps, and try to become the kind of person who just does the work no matter what. And sometimes that works for a little while. But when you're tired, or you're stressed, or you're under very real pressure, brute force is usually the first thing to run out. That's the discipline trap. You think the problem is that you don't have enough discipline, so you try to add more force. But the force is being applied on top of the same focus, the same meaning, and the same view of yourself that created the resistance in the first place. So now you're not just doing the work, you're also fighting yourself while trying to do the work. And that gets exhausting fast. This shows up in really subtle ways. Maybe you have a morning routine that normally helps you. You want to wake up at a certain time, work out, eat well, read, plan the day, and get yourself into the right mental state before work starts. And when it goes well, it does help. But then one morning, it doesn't go exactly the way it was supposed to. Maybe meditation and planning your days happened at 6:30 instead of 5:45. Maybe breakfast is rushed, or you don't get through the full routine. On the surface, that looks like a scheduling issue. But the real shift often happens in the meaning, because now your day doesn't just start later. Your day starts with a story. I'm already behind. I didn't stay on top of it. I'm not disciplined enough. This probably isn't going to be a good work day. And once that meaning takes over, you sit down at your desk already seeing your morning like it's proof of your weaknesses. That's what most entrepreneurs miss. The morning routine may have changed, but the meaning you attach to that change can take over the whole day. So now you're not just trying to answer emails and write the post or make the call or finish the proposal or work on the project. You're trying to do all of that while carrying the feeling that you already failed the first test of the day. And from that state, discipline feels like the only solution. Except now you're using discipline out of shame. It feels like punishment. It feels like I need to make up for the fact that I'm not where I should be. Instead of trying to move towards what you're trying to accomplish out of a desire for success and growth, you're simply moving away from failure out of shame and guilt. So you try to force the behavior. You try to make yourself focus, make yourself stop procrastinating, and make yourself move faster because the day already feels like it's slipping away. But the problem is that your focus, your meaning, and your actions are now moving in different directions. Your action says work, but your focus is on how far behind you are and the meaning underneath it. This proves I'm not doing enough. And that creates dissonance. You're trying to act like someone who's steady, disciplined, capable, and in command, while internally seeing yourself as behind, inconsistent, and not where you should be. And your mind doesn't like that kind of dissonance. At some point, something has to give. Usually the behavior gives first, because it's easier to abandon the disciplined action than it is to change what you're focusing on and how you're interpreting it and who you believe you are in that moment. It's not because you're incapable of discipline. A lot of entrepreneurs are incredibly disciplined in many areas of their life. They've done hard things, they've built skills and carried lots of responsibility, and they've pushed through seasons that most people wouldn't choose. So the question isn't, do I have any discipline? A better question is, what is my discipline being built on? Because discipline that's built on pressure or shame and urgency and not being good enough may create motion, but it usually doesn't create freedom. It can get you to act, but it often leaves you tense during the whole process. It can help you produce results, but it can also make the business feel like something you have to survive. It can get you through the day, but it doesn't necessarily build the kind of internal command that lets you feel free inside of the business that you're creating. And that's the difference. A lot of people aren't looking for discipline because they love discipline. They're looking for discipline because they want freedom. They want to trust themselves. They want to know that they can sit down and do the meaningful work without needing panic to get things done. They want to stop having every day depend on whether the morning went perfectly, whether they wake up feeling motivated, or whether the business success validates them. But when discipline is the only tool, the answer is always some version of force yourself harder. If that worked permanently, it would have worked by now. The issue isn't that you need to shame yourself into more action. The issue is that your action keeps returning to the pattern underneath it. If your focus is, look what I haven't accomplished yet, and your interpretation is, this proves I'm not disciplined enough, then the action you've tried to force will carry that belief with it. You might still work hard, but you're working from a less effective mental and emotional state that's subtly sabotaging your growth. That's why you can do the right things and still feel trapped. You have an optimized morning routine, a filled out planner, proven strategy, a solid checklist, and a business. Meanwhile, your internal state is still organized around fear, stress, and a belief that you're not good enough. That doesn't mean those tools are useless. It just means they're not the root cause. A calendar can help you organize time, but it can't automatically change what an unfinished task means about you. A morning routine can help you start the day well, but it can't automatically stop you from turning a small disruption into evidence that the day is ruined. A strategy can give you direction, but it can't automatically give you emotional resilience and confidence when the outcome's uncertain. And discipline can help you consistently take action, but it can't fully solve the problem if the part of you taking action is still operating from, I'm behind, I'm failing, I'm not enough, I have to prove that I can make this work. That's why the order matters. Most people try to change behavior first and hope that the internal state catches up later. They think, once I become more disciplined, then I'll feel more capable. Once the business starts working better, then I'll feel free. And there's some truth to that. Action does create evidence. But if the action's coming from an internal map that says, I'm not enough until I do more, then even progress you make can get swallowed up by the next thing you haven't done yet. You get something finished and your mind immediately moves to what's still unfinished. You make progress, but it doesn't feel like progress because external markers for sufficient growth keep moving. You have a productive day, but instead of receiving that as evidence that you're capable, your mind says, good job. Now you just have to do that again tomorrow and the next day and the next day, or else it doesn't count. That's why more discipline can become a trap. Because if the deeper meaning is still, I'm not where I should be, then discipline just becomes another way to measure how far behind you are. And that's not freedom. That's just more organized form of pressure. The better path isn't to throw discipline away. The better path is to put discipline in the right place. Discipline works better when it's not being used to fight your identity. It works better when it's an expression of who you're becoming, not a weapon you use against who you're afraid you might be. That means before you ask, how do I force myself to do this? You start asking different questions. What am I focusing on right now? What am I making this mean for me? What version of myself am I acting from? Am I trying to take action from clarity, or am I trying to take action from shame? Am I using discipline to move toward what matters, or am I using it to prove that I'm not behind? Those questions change the layer that you're working on, because you're not only trying to make yourself behave, you're looking at the internal pattern that keeps making the old behavior feel necessary. This is where focus, meaning, and action become really important. Your focus is what your mind locks onto. Your meaning is what you decide that focus says about you, or your business, or your future, or your capability. And your action is what you do next from that state. So if your focus is on the fact that your morning didn't go perfectly, and the meaning is, I'm already failing today, then the action that follows probably won't be calm or effective. You may push harder, avoid, overplan, waste time on lower risk tasks, or start searching for new strategy because the current one suddenly feels unsafe. But all of those actions are downstream from the focus and the meaning that came first. That's why the goal isn't simply to become more disciplined. The goal is to become more in command of the internal process that your discipline is coming from. Because when your focus changes, different actions become available. When the meaning changes, your body responds differently. When your identity isn't constantly under threat, the work doesn't have to carry as much emotional weight. And when the action comes from a more relaxed, confident, internal state, discipline starts to feel less like dragging yourself uphill all day and instead becomes more of a natural expression of who you are. It's not effortless all the time. It's not always easy, nor is it always automatic, but it's not a constant fight. So you're not constantly wasting your energy just trying to stay afloat. That's what most entrepreneurs actually want. They don't just want to force themselves through more work. They want the work to stop feeling like they have to micromanage themselves. They want to sit down, see what's in front of them, and put their energy into the most effective and productive projects, instead of spending half the day arguing with themselves about why they're not already further along. That's why the discipline conversation has to go deeper. Because if you only try to solve this with more force, you may get temporary motion, but the pattern usually comes back the moment the pressure rises. The missed morning routine comes back. The packed schedule comes back. The uncertain lead comes back. The day where you don't feel like your best self comes back. And if the only tool you have is force, then every one of those moments become another test of whether you can push hard enough. That's exhausting. And it's not the same as freedom. Instead of asking, how do I become so disciplined that pressure never affects me? Ask yourself this: how do I build the internal capacity to direct my focus, change my interpretation, and take better action when pressure is present? That's the shift. Discipline is still important, but discipline is no longer the whole strategy. It becomes part of a larger internal system. And that's exactly why I put together the free guide that goes with this video. It walks through the difference between the things you're trying to change, the strategies you've already tried, and what you actually want instead. It also explains why so many different strategies don't help continuously when the deeper internal problem hasn't shifted yet. So grab that guide below in the caption. Once you see that more discipline isn't the whole answer, the next question becomes even more personal. Why do you keep avoiding the work that would actually grow the business even when you care about it? So click on this video here on your screen to learn the next step in the process.